Hi, I'm glad to see you on my channel. Today I'll tell interesting stories from Greek mythology. Enjoy listening and don't forget to subscribe.
Close your eyes for a moment. Tonight we travel far back, further than history books can carry you easily, to a time when the gods still walked the earth in disguise, when the sea had a temper of its own, and when one man's journey home became the greatest story the ancient world ever told. His name was Odysseus, and he spent 10 long years trying to find his way back to a small island called Ithaca. That is all it sounds like at first, a simple journey home. A man who wants to return to his family, and yet within that simple longing lives every fear, every temptation, every test of courage and wisdom that a human soul can face. Listen, and I will take you there. Not all at once, but gently, like the tide coming in over warm sand, wave by wave, until you fall asleep somewhere on the shores of the ancient world, wrapped in a story older than writing itself. Let us begin at the very beginning, which is never truly a beginning at all, because before Odysseus could return home, he had to leave home. And to understand how deeply he wanted to come back, you must first understand just how much he gave up in going. The year, if we dare to place it in time, was somewhere around 1180 BCE, though historians and archaeologists argue the precise date the way old sailors argue over the weather. What we know is this: on the northwestern coast of what is now Turkey, on a windswept hill above a plain near the Dardanelles Strait, stood the city of Troy. And Troy by this time had already endured 10 years of war. 10 years. Think of that. 10 years of Greek soldiers camped on a foreign shore, far from their homes, watching the walls of that city shimmer in the Mediterranean heat. 10 years of mothers growing old without their sons, of children learning to walk and talk who had never seen their fathers' faces. 10 years of war that had begun, so the stories say, over something as ancient and as ruinous as beauty. A woman named Helen, whose face the poet Marlowe would one day write, launched 1,000 ships. The Greeks had come from across the Aegean, from Mycenae and Sparta, from Pylos and Corinth, from the islands and the mainland, drawn together by King Agamemnon's call to arms. And among them, sailing with 12 black-hulled ships and the men of Ithaca, came Odysseus, the king of a small rocky island in the Ionian Sea, a man of medium height, broad-shouldered and dark-haired, with eyes the color of grey seawater under clouds. He was not the greatest warrior among the Greeks. That title belonged to Achilles, the golden-haired son of a sea nymph, nearly divine in his speed and fury. Odysseus was something else entirely. He was the clever one, the one who thought before he struck, the one the gods had blessed not with supernatural strength, but with something rarer and more dangerous, a mind that could find a way through any maze. It was Odysseus, the ancient historians tell us, who suggested the wooden horse. When 10 years of siege warfare had failed to crack the walls of Troy, when great Achilles himself had already fallen, struck by an arrow guided by Apollo into the one vulnerable spot on his heel, it was Odysseus who devised the plan that ended the war in a single night. A great horse, built of timber, hollow in its belly, and inside that belly, 30 of the finest Greek warriors coiled in the darkness, barely breathing, waiting. The Greeks pretended to sail away. The Trojans, weeping with joy, pulled the horse within their walls as a gift, a trophy, a sign that the gods had at last smiled on them. And in the deep of night, when Troy was drunk on celebration and relief, the belly of the horse opened, and the Greeks poured out like a terrible dream from which the city never woke. By dawn, Troy was burning. You can still go there today if you wish. The ruins of what archaeologists call Troy 7, a city destroyed by fire and violence sometime in the late Bronze Age, lie at a place called Hisarlik in modern Turkey. When the German businessman and amateur archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann dug into that hill in the 1870s, he was so certain he had found the legendary Troy that he dressed his wife in golden jewelry he unearthed and called it the treasure of Priam. He was wrong about which layer. He dug too deep, past the right one, but he was right about what was there. A city. A real city. Burned. Destroyed. On the shore of a strait through which ships still pass today, history and legend, as so often happens, had been sleeping in the same bed. But the burning of Troy, that is where our story begins. Imagine standing on the plains outside the city, in the grey hour before dawn, when the fires are already high, and the smoke of 10 years of human ambition is rising into a sky that cares nothing for either side. The smell of burning cedar and bronze and grain fills the salt air. Around you, Greek soldiers are moving through the fallen city, loading ships with plunder, with captives, with the gold and silver and painted pottery of a civilization that took centuries to build and one night to unmake. And among all of them, Odysseus is already thinking ahead. He is thinking of Ithaca, that small island. It lies in the Ionian Sea, just west of the Greek mainland. Was not the richest kingdom in Greece, nor the most powerful, but it was his. He had a wife there named Penelope, one of the cleverest women in any legend or history ever written. He had a son, Telemachus, who had been barely a baby when Odysseus sailed away to war. Telemachus would be 10 years old now, perhaps already learning to use a bow. Odysseus had spent 10 years fighting for another king's cause, on another man's shore, and now, at last, it was time to go home. He loaded his 12 ships. He gathered his men, the Ithacans who had survived the war, who were lean and scarred and desperately ready for home. They sacrificed to the gods, poured wine into the sea, lifted their oars, and turned west. And immediately, the trouble began. This is something the historians of ancient seafaring understand very well. The Mediterranean, for all its beauty, is not a gentle sea. It is a sea of sudden storms, of treacherous currents, of coasts that offer shelter and coasts that offer nothing but rocks. The ancient Greeks were extraordinary sailors. Their ships, called pentacontas or biremes, were lean and fast, built of pine and oak, powered by oars and sail, and navigated by men who knew the stars the way we know street signs. But even they were at the mercy of the wind. And the wind, as anyone who has ever sailed will tell you, is utterly indifferent to human plans. The first stop on Odysseus's long journey home was not a stop he chose. It was a stop the war chose for him. Sailing north along the coast of Thrace, the northeastern corner of modern Greece, bordering what is now Bulgaria and Turkey, Odysseus and his men came to the city of Ismara. This was the home of the Ciconians, a people allied with Troy. And perhaps Odysseus felt that the war was not quite over, that there was still one more battle to be fought against, one more enemy. Or perhaps his men, drunk on victory, insisted. The ancient sources are honest about this. The sacking of Ismara was not a noble act. It was a raid. His men attacked the city, killed the men, took the women and plunder, and then, and here is where Odysseus's wisdom failed him, where human nature overruled good sense. Instead of immediately sailing away, they stayed to celebrate on the beach. They slaughtered cattle and drank wine, and they made the kind of noise that carries across the hills on a still night. Odysseus urged them to leave. He knew. He could feel it in the air. The wrongness of staying too long. The same instinct that tells an experienced traveler when a place has turned against you. But his men were reveling and would not listen. And so the morning came, and with it, something far worse than a hangover. The surviving Ciconians had sent word inland through the night, and at dawn, like a tide of spears and shields, their allies came pouring down from the hills. 7 warriors for every Cretan, the ancient text tells us. And what that means in practice is far too many. Odysseus's men scrambled for the ships, oars were grabbed, sails were raised in desperate haste, and they fled, but not before losing 6 men from each of his 12 ships. 72 men, 72 souls who had survived 10 years of war at Troy, only to die on a beach in Thrace because the wine was too good and the morning came too fast. Odysseus wept for them, Homer tells us. He wept openly, as the ancient Greeks had no shame in doing, and the image of that weeping is one of the most quietly human moments in all of ancient literature. This great warrior, this cunning strategist, sitting in his ship with his head in his hands, watching the coast of Thrace disappear behind him, counting his dead. 72 men. He would count the losses many times before this journey was done. The sea, as if sensing his grief and deciding to add to it, now delivered its next blow. Zeus, the king of the gods, the lord of storms and lightning, whose moods are as changeable as the sky itself, looked down from his seat on Olympus and decided to make things harder. The ancient Greeks understood the weather as divine will. When a storm came without warning, it was not random atmospheric physics. It was Zeus expressing an opinion. And Zeus, on this occasion, apparently had strong opinions about Odysseus. A north wind screamed down from the mountains of Thrace, hit the fleet like a wall, and drove the ships south. The sails were torn. The waves rose dark and frothing. The men bent over their oars in the grey chaos of a Mediterranean storm, and for 2 days and 2 nights they were pushed helplessly south, across the churning Aegean, around the wild southern cape of the Peloponnese, a headland called Cape Malea, which every ancient sailor knew by reputation and prayed never to meet in bad weather. Cape Malea. Let me tell you about Cape Malea, because it is important. It is the southernmost point of the Greek mainland, where the Aegean and the Mediterranean meet, where currents collide and wines are funneled between the islands, creating conditions that even modern sailors treat with respect. The ancient Greeks had a saying about it: round Cape Malea and forget your homeland. It was the edge of the known world, the point beyond which the ordinary rules began to loosen, where familiar stars shifted slightly, and the coastline stopped looking like anything on any sailor's memory. Beyond Cape Malea, the journey stopped being a journey home and started being something else entirely. And it was around Cape Malea that the storm caught Odysseus and drove him further still, further west, further south, further into the unknown, until the wind finally fell and the sea grew flat and strange, and the sun was too high and too hot, and the air smelled of something sweet and unfamiliar. They had no idea where they were. This is one of the most haunting aspects of ancient seafaring that we sometimes forget in our age of GPS and satellite maps. You could genuinely get lost. Not lost as in you took the wrong motorway exit. Lost as in you have no idea what land this is, what language these people speak, whether they are friendly, whether the water is safe to drink, whether the berries are poisonous, Whether there is a God here you have not properly honored. Lost as in, the only stars you know by heart are partially obscured by cloud, and your best guess about your position is wrong by 300 miles. That kind of lost. The kind that settles into the chest like cold water. They rowed to shore. The land that met them was soft and low, almost dreamlike in its stillness. There were trees, or perhaps they were large flowering shrubs, and the air was thick with a sweetness that the men could not identify. Local people appeared on the shore, gentle, unhurried, people who smiled and offered no threat and held out their hands with a kind of placid hospitality. They gave the Greek sailors food, fruit of some kind, or flower, or root. The ancient text calls it the lotus, and scholars have spent centuries debating what exactly Homer meant. Some say it was the fruit of the jujube tree, a sweet date-like thing that grows in North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean. Some say the opium poppy, whose milky sap has been known to humanity for at least 6,000 years. Some say it was a kind of fermented honey wine that the locals made from the flowering lotus plant. Whatever it was, the men who ate it forgot. Not in the way of a small forgetting, a temporary distraction, but a deep, peaceful, total forgetting. They forgot Troy. They forgot the battle. They forgot the 72 men who had died on the beach. They forgot Ithaca. They forgot their wives and their children and their dogs and their cold stone houses on a windy island in the Ionian Sea. They sat among the Lotus-Eaters, for that is what Homer calls these people, simply and perfectly. And they were content. They were more than content. They were complete in the way that people are complete only when they have no desires left unfulfilled, no memories to ache, no futures to fear. And Odysseus, who had not eaten the lotus, looked at his men and felt something cold move through him, because he recognized it. Not the plant, perhaps, but the feeling, the temptation of forgetting, the seductive idea that if you could simply stop remembering what you left behind, the pain of the journey would dissolve. The men were not suffering. They were, by every visible measure, happy. And yet, Odysseus walked among them and grabbed them, bodily, physically dragging them back toward the ships, while they wept and begged to be allowed to stay, while they reached back toward the shore with open hands, while they called the names of the soft-handed people who had fed them their beautiful forgetting. He carried them and tied them under the rowing benches and ordered the rest of the men to row hard and fast before anyone else could step ashore and eat and lose themselves in that quiet sweetness. It was not a kind thing to do. It may even have looked cruel from the outside. But Odysseus understood something that the Lotus-Eaters had forgotten to teach, that home is not a place you can replace, that the ache of longing, as painful as it is proof of love, that a man who forgets Ithaca is no longer quite the man who left it, and the man who left Ithaca had a son waiting, a wife waiting, a dog waiting, if time had been kind enough. He could not afford to forget. He had the men row through the rest of that day and into the evening, until the sweet-smelling shore was completely gone, and only the open sea lay around them in every direction. The men who had eaten the lotus cried softly as they rowed, crying for something they could no longer clearly remember. By morning, the crying had faded, replaced by the ordinary misery of hunger and thirst and aching muscles. And in that ordinary misery, something of themselves returned. Odysseus looked at the sun and tried to calculate their position. He was, by any ancient reckoning, a gifted navigator. a man who could read the sea's color and smell, who knew which birds flew over which waters, who could take the measure of a star's height above the horizon with practiced eyes. But the storm had pushed them far. The Lotus-Eaters' shore was believed by the ancient world to lie somewhere along the coast of North Africa, perhaps modern Libya, perhaps Tunisia, the very heart of what would one day be Carthage. They were far, very far from Ithaca. The sun told him, west and north, row west, row north. Find land, find water, find your way. He set the course. The oars dipped into the sea in their slow, exhausting rhythm. One stroke, another stroke, another. The way that long journeys have always been made, not in leaps, but in steps. Not all at once, but one small motion after another, until you look up and the horizon has changed. The night was coming now, that ancient night full of stars that the Greeks had named and mapped with extraordinary care. Orion with his belt of 3 bright lights, the Pleiades like a small smudge of silver, the North Star that never moved, fixed as a pin in the dark cloth of the sky. Sailors had used these stars for centuries before Odysseus, and they would use them for centuries after, and in between, one tired man on one small ship looked up at them from the wine-dark sea, and perhaps felt something like comfort. The stars, at least, were the same everywhere. He did not know on that quiet evening as the oars slowed and the men began to sleep on their benches that the worst was still ahead. He did not know that the god of the sea himself, Poseidon, lord of earthquakes and ocean, the one deity whose kingdom could not be avoided by any sailor alive, had turned against him. He did not know about the Cyclops. He did not know about the witch Circe, or the land of the dead, or the Sirens, or the monster Scylla, or the whirlpool Charybdis, or the cattle of the sun. He did not know that of all the men who had sailed from Ithaca with him, 12 ships full, not one would make it home alive, except himself. He only knew that he was far away, and that somewhere to the northwest, past the dark water and the unknown shore, there was a small rocky island where a woman was weaving, and a boy was growing up without a father, and a dog was waiting by the door. There are no other words for it that feel quite right. Carried is the right word, because on that particular stretch of dark Mediterranean water, after the lotus shore had faded behind them, and the stars of the Ionian sky had wheeled slowly overhead, it felt less like sailing and more like being held. The wind was light. The oars moved in their slow, meditative rhythm. The men who had wept for the lotus flowers had stopped weeping by now, replaced by the ordinary dull ache of the journey, which is in many ways kinder than grief. Ordinary pain, at least, is something you can row through. Odysseus sat at the prow, as he so often did. He was a man who thought best at the front of things, at the front of a battle, at the front of an argument, at the front of a ship on a dark sea. He was running calculations in his head the way a navigator does. Distance covered, wind direction, the angle of the North Star above the horizon, the color of the water at dusk, which had been a particular shade of deep blue that told him they were over open ocean and not approaching a shelf. He had 12 ships when he left Troy. Now he had 12 still. The Ciconians had killed men, not vessels, and the storm at Cape Malea had bruised the fleet, but not broken it. 12 ships and most of their crews. He was still, by any ancient reckoning, a man with resources, a man who could afford a mistake or two. He did not know, sitting there in the dark, that he was about to make several. The island appeared in the way that islands always appear at sea, as a darkness on the horizon that might be cloud, that slowly resolves into something more solid, something that doesn't move with the sky. It was night when they first saw it, and the island across the narrow water was black and hulking and very still. But beyond it, closer, there was another shore, lower, softer, with the smell of wild thyme and salt grass carried on the breeze, and the distant sound of goats on hillsides. The men needed rest. They needed water. They needed to eat something that wasn't dried fish and old flatbread. Without a word of debate, they rowed toward the nearer shore and dragged the ships up onto the beach in the darkness. Wild goats were everywhere on that island. Homer tells us this with the enthusiasm of a man who has been hungry. Countless wild goats, he writes, not harassed by human treading. The men hunted them through the night and into the morning, and they ate well for the first time in days. And they drank wine. They had good wine with them still. A gift from a priest of Apollo at Ismara. 12 jars of wine so dark and fragrant that it needed diluting with 20 parts water before it could safely be drunk. And they looked across the narrow channel of water to the larger island opposite. It was close enough to see smoke rising from it in the morning light. Close enough to hear, faintly, the sound of voices. Deep voices. Or perhaps not voices. Perhaps only the wind and the rocks, shaped by the coastal formations into something that resembled sound. Odysseus decided to investigate. This is the moment historians and literary scholars have puzzled over for centuries. Why? He had food. He had water. The men were rested and relatively safe. Why cross to the unknown shore? Some scholars say it was the Greek heroic code, kleos, the pursuit of fame and story, which demanded that a man push toward the unknown rather than away from it. Others say it was simple pragmatism, supplies, intelligence, information about what lay ahead. Homer himself is honest about the motivation, placing in Odysseus's own mouth the simple admission. I wish to see the inhabitants and learn whether they were wild and violent, or hospitable to strangers and God-fearing. Curiosity, in other words. The same thing that has driven explorers and historians and archaeologists for all of human time. The same thing that more than once in this story nearly destroyed everyone. He took one ship, he left the rest on the beach. He took his best men, 12 of them, chosen for steadiness and courage, and they crossed the channel in the early morning light. The cave was enormous. You must try to picture it as the Greeks would have pictured it, or as a real shepherd's cave on a Sicilian hillside might look today. Because Sicily is where most ancient scholars place the land of the Cyclopes, the island that smells of volcanic rock and wild herbs, where the Greeks would eventually found colonies in the 8th century BCE. The cave was set into the hillside shaded by laurel trees, its entrance tall as a ship's mast, its floor covered in fresh sheep dung and dried cheese and huge wicker baskets, and clay pots so large a man could sleep in them. The pens outside held goats and sheep in vast numbers. Whoever lived here was a shepherd of substantial means. They went inside. The fire was cold. The owner was out with his flocks. The men looked around at the size of everything, the grinding stones, the milk pails, the firewood stacked in bundles taller than a man, the cheeses hanging from the roof in nets, enormous cheeses, the size of cartwheels, and the men helped themselves, because they were hungry, and sailors rarely ask permission of empty rooms. They lit a fire. They waited. And then the ground shook. That is not metaphor. It is what Homer describes, the ground shaking as something large came home, dropping an enormous load of firewood at the cave entrance with a crash that sent the men scrambling to the back wall. Then a boulder, a great crag, Homer calls it, the kind that 22 wagons could not move, scraped across the entrance and sealed them in. The fire was lit, and in its light, the creature that lived there became visible. Here is where we pause for a moment and put on our historian's hat, because the Cyclops is one of the most fascinating creatures in all of Greek mythology, not just as story, but as theory. On the island of Sicily and on other Mediterranean islands, the fossilized skulls of dwarf elephants had lain in limestone caves for thousands of years, exposed by erosion and earthquake. These skulls were larger than any human skull, vaguely humanoid in proportion, and at the center of the face where the trunk root had been, there was a single large nasal cavity, a hole roughly the size and shape of an eye socket. Ancient Greeks who found these skulls, with no knowledge of prehistoric elephants, would have had only one logical conclusion: a creature shaped like a giant man, with one eye in the center of its face. The paleontologist Adrian Mayer has written compellingly about this, that the Cyclops myth was born, at least in part, from genuine bones found in genuine caves, interpreted by genuinely curious ancient minds. The creature that turned toward the fire and looked at the huddled Greeks was enormous. One eye centered in a face as wide as a cartwheel. A shepherd, yes, but of a kind that pastoral poetry never prepared anyone for. His name was Polyphemus, and he was the son of Poseidon, god of the sea. That detail is important. Hold it gently in your mind for now. The conversation that followed was one of the most grimly instructive exchanges in all of ancient literature, because it is a conversation about the rules of civilization and what happens when those rules are simply refused. Odysseus appealed to Xenia. This was the ancient Greek code of hospitality, one of the bedrock principles of civilized life. That a stranger at your door must be fed, sheltered, and sent on their way with gifts. The gods, Zeus himself, were believed to watch over this code and to punish its violation. It was not merely polite custom, it was sacred law. Odysseus invoked it formally, carefully, as a man invokes a legal protection. We are suppliants at your knees. We ask you to give the gift that is due to strangers, or to respect the gods. For Zeus is the protector of suppliants and of guests. Polyphemus laughed. The Cyclopes, he explained, in a rumbling, unhurried voice, do not care about Zeus. They do not care about any god. They are stronger than the gods, and they make their own rules, and their rules do not include feeding strangers. His only question was a practical one. Where had they beached their ship? Odysseus lied. He said the ship was gone, wrecked on the rocks by Poseidon's will. He was already thinking, you see, already calculating. He did not know yet what came next, but he knew that a creature this large, this lawless, this utterly indifferent to the protection of divine law was not going to respond to argument. And he was right, because Polyphemus simply reached out and grabbed two of the men, two of Odysseus's carefully chosen 12, and dashed them against the cave floor the way you might break pomegranates for juice, and ate them. And then he went to sleep. The men wept silently in the darkness. Odysseus's hand went to his sword, and then stopped. The cave entrance was sealed with a boulder that 50 men could not move. If he killed the Cyclops in the night, they would be sealed inside forever. He had to think, and thinking was, as we have established, the one thing Odysseus could always do, even in the dark, even with the sound of a sleeping giant filling the cave, and the smell of his fire, and his sheep, and the terrible remains of 2 men smearing the floor. He thought all night. By morning, he had a plan. There was a great wooden club lying by the cave wall, olive wood, green and newly cut, seasoned enough to be hard, the size of a ship's mast. While Polyphemus was away with his flocks the next day, having eaten 2 more men for breakfast, as calmly as a man eats bread, which is the detail that haunts more than any other, Odysseus and his remaining men took that club and cut from it a section as long as a man's height, and they sharpened one end to a point, and they hardened the tip in the cave's fire until it glowed. Then they hid it under the fresh dung on the cave floor, and they waited. Polyphemus came home at evening. 2 more men went the way of the others, and then Odysseus stepped forward with a bowl of wine. The wine from Ismara, remember the 12 jars given by the priest of Apollo, so powerful that it was meant to be diluted 20 to 1. Odysseus offered it neat, pure, undiluted, the kind of wine that ancient sources describe as sweet as honey, dark and rich and extraordinarily strong, the kind that hits a man or a giant like a wave. "Drink, Cyclops," said Odysseus. "Have some wine to follow your meal of human flesh. See what kind of drink we had in our ship's hold." Polyphemus drank the bowl. He liked it. He asked for more. He asked again. And as the great eye began to grow soft and the enormous frame began to sway, he asked Odysseus, with what passed for warmth in a creature that had just eaten 4 of his companions, what his name was, so that he might give him a guest gift in return. And Odysseus said, "My name is Nobody. That is what everyone calls me. My mother, my father, all my friends." It was the cleverest lie in all of ancient literature. Polyphemus smiled with his enormous blood-stained mouth and told nobody that his guest gift would be to be eaten last of all his companions. Then the giant fell back and slept, and the wine poured out of him in great reeking waves, and Odysseus went for the steak. They heated the tip in the fire until it glowed orange-white, until the olive wood smoldered with a sharp, clean smell. And then, all 5 of them together, Odysseus and 4 chosen companions gripping the length of it, they drove it into the sleeping eye. Homer describes it with the precision of a man who wants you to understand exactly what happened. The way the eyeball hissed, the way the blood ran, the way the roots of the eye sizzled like a hot iron plunged into cold water. The sound Polyphemus made was not a scream exactly. It was larger than a scream. It echoed off the cave walls and out into the night sky, and on the hillsides all around the other Cyclopes woke in their own caves and called out through the dark, "Polyphemus, who is hurting you? Is someone killing you by force or by treachery?" And Polyphemus roared back the only name he knew, "Nobody. Nobody is killing me. Nobody is hurting me by force and treachery." A long silence from the dark hillsides, and then one by one, the other voices. "Well, if nobody is hurting you, then it must be an illness sent by Zeus. Pray to your father Poseidon." And the voices fell silent and went back to sleep. And Odysseus pressed his face into the sheep-dung floor of the cave and shook with what might have been silent laughter, or silent weeping, or simply the uncontrollable trembling of a man who has just done something terrible and brilliant and is not yet sure he will survive it. The escape required the same quality of mind as the blinding. Not strength, but patience, and the willingness to think through every step when every instinct screams to run. Polyphemus, blinded and roaring with pain, rolled back the entrance stone at dawn to let his sheep out to pasture, crouching at the entrance to catch any man who tried to flee through the gap. but he was feeling for men. He was feeling with his hands over the backs of the sheep as they filed past. Enormous animals, their wool thick and deep, curling close to their sides. Odysseus had spent the night tying his men beneath the animals, not on their backs, beneath, gripping the thick belly wool a man slung under each sheep like a package under a cart. The rams were large enough, the wool deep enough, that a man hanging underneath was invisible to a hand running over the back. He tied 3 sheep abreast for each man, the middle one carrying its human cargo, the flanking ones simply guiding the middle through the entrance. And he chose for himself the largest ram in the flock, an old animal, vast and dark-fleeced, and he clung beneath it with his hands knotted in the wool, face pressed against the warm animal smell of it, breathing its heat. Polyphemus felt every animal as it passed. He spoke to the last ram, Odysseus's ram, with a tenderness that is, even now, the most unexpectedly moving moment in the entire episode. He ran his great hands over its back and said quietly into its ear, "My poor old ram, why are you last today? You are always first. Are you grieving for your master's eye? If only you could speak and tell me where nobody is hiding." The ram walked through the entrance. Odysseus dropped from the fleece, grabbed the nearest men, drove them toward the ships at a dead run. They shoved the boats into the water, hauled the oars, pulled with everything they had left, and when they were far enough out, when the beach was behind them and the dark bulk of the island was retreating, Odysseus did something that the story is honest enough to record, honest enough to treat not as heroism but as a flaw. He shouted. He shouted back at the blind giant standing on the shore, "Cyclops, if anyone ever asks who put out your eye, tell them it was Odysseus, raider of cities, son of Laertes, whose home is Ithaca." The men begged him to stop. "Don't, he'll hear you. He'll call down his father." But Odysseus shouted again, louder, because the heroic code demanded it. Because a man who does a deed and does not claim it earns no kleos, no glory, no place in the story. And there it was, the pride that lives inside even the cleverest man, the pride that cannot be fully reasoned away, that rises at the worst possible moment and announces itself to the sky. Polyphemus heard the name, and Polyphemus raised his blind face toward his father's domain, toward the sea, toward the dark water, toward Poseidon who owned everything beneath the waves, and he prayed. "Grant," he said, "that Odysseus, son of Laertes of Ithaca, never reach his home. Or if he must, let him arrive late, alone, on a stranger's ship, to find trouble waiting in his halls." The prayer went up into the air above the wine-dark sea, and Poseidon, god of the deep, father of the blinded sun, heard it. From that moment forward, the sea itself was Odysseus's enemy. They sailed on shaking legs and burning chests, not speaking, the sounds of the night still in their heads, the hissing of the stake, the sound the giant made, the gentle voice speaking to the ram. They retrieved the rest of the fleet from the beach on the Goat Island, and the men there came running down to meet them. And there was a brief and awful moment of counting. 2 ships here, 2 ships there, and the arithmetic of how many men had left that cave upright. They sailed through the rest of the night. In the morning, the sea was calm and blue and entirely indifferent to what had happened in it. The sun came up clean and bright over the Tyrrhenian water, and the oarsmen pulled in their slow rhythm, and Odysseus sat at the prow and felt the weight of the prayer that was out there now, working its way through the deep currents, working toward the ears of a god who had all the time in the world. He did not know yet how long that god would make him pay. He did not know about the island ahead, the floating island of Aeolia, home of Aeolus, keeper of the winds, who would be generous and kind and give Odysseus the most extraordinary gift. All the dangerous winds of the world tied up neatly in an ox-skin bag, so that only the gentle west wind remained free to carry them home. He did not know how close to Ithaca that west wind would bring them, so close that the men on watch could see the fires on the shore, could smell the wood smoke of their own island, could have sworn they heard dogs barking on familiar hillsides before exhaustion would take him under, and his suspicious men would open the bag while he slept, and the winds would howl out in a single catastrophic moment and blow them all the way back to where they had started. He did not know about the Laestrygonians, the other race of giants who lived on a distant shore, in a harbour shaped like a perfect trap, surrounded by cliffs that made an amphitheatre for slaughter, who would meet the Greek scouts with apparent hospitality and then eat one of them in front of the others, who would pour onto the cliff tops above the harbour with boulders the size of houses and rain them down on 11 of his 12 ships, smashing them to splinters, spearing the men who spilled into the water like fish on a hook. 11 ships, gone. In the space of an afternoon, 300 men, maybe more, who had survived Troy and the storm and the Cyclops and the Lotus shore, lost in a harbour that looked safe and was not. He did not know that one ship would escape, only one, his own, which he had moored sensibly outside the harbour mouth instead of sailing in with the others, because something about those perfect cliffs had made the hair on his neck stand up. That instinct would save him and his crew alone. The rest, the men of 11 ships, the faces and names he had known for 10 years of war and 5 months of wandering, would remain forever in that harbour, at the bottom of a foreign sea, while above them the giants on the cliffs threw rocks into the water long after there was nothing left to throw them at. These things were still ahead. For now there was only the morning, and the calm sea, and the slow pull of the oars, and the smell of salt and wood and unwashed men, and somewhere deep in the water below the keel, a god's long, cold, patient anger beginning its work. Let that thought settle quietly, like a ship coming to anchor in a sheltered bay. The sea around the fleet is still tonight, no wind. The stars are brilliant above the mast tops, and the men are sleeping the deep sleep of those who have come through something they were not sure they would survive. Tomorrow there will be more water, more coast, more decisions. Tomorrow there is always more, but not tonight. Tonight the oars are shipped, the sails are furled. The ships drift gently on the breast of the dark water, and somewhere on his vessel, Odysseus is staring at the stars with the expression of a man who has just made an expensive mistake and is already calculating how to recover from it. He is tired. He is more tired than he has ever been in his life, but he is awake. He is always awake. It is perhaps the one thing about him that never wavers. Not hope, not courage, not even love, but the simple refusal to stop thinking, to stop calculating, to stop looking at the dark horizon and believing that something on the other side of it can yet be turned to his advantage. His name is out there now, carried on Polyphemus's prayer into the deep currents of the sea. Every wave that reaches him from this point forward will carry a little of that god's enmity in it. Every storm will be a little more intentional. Every calm will be a little more deliberate. He has earned an enemy he cannot fight, cannot trick, cannot outwit, because Poseidon owns the very medium through which he must travel home. It is not the clean, dreamless tiredness of honest labor, not the good ache of a man who has rowed all day and eaten well and has nothing on his conscience. It is something deeper and stranger. a heaviness that settles behind the eyes and in the joints and in the chest, a weight that is not quite physical, that sleep does not entirely lift. The men who rowed away from the Laestrygonians' harbour carried this exhaustion with them, like a second cargo. They had been 11 ships when they sailed in. They were one ship when they rowed out. The mathematics of that would not leave them. Every man on that single surviving vessel was counting the faces that were no longer there, running the numbers, arriving at the same terrible answer again and again and again. Odysseus let them row in silence. There are moments when a leader's greatest gift to his people is simply the permission to feel what they are feeling without being told to stop. He had no speech ready. He had no plan yet. He had only the westward heading and the oars and the grey Mediterranean morning sliding past on both sides. After a time, the coast of an island appeared, low and wooded, smelling of pine and herbs, with no visible people and no visible smoke, and the only sound the long, unhurried sound of the sea. They ran the ship aground and lay on the beach. Homer tells us they lay there for 2 days and 2 nights. Not sleeping exactly, not resting exactly, but in that state between the two that the ancient Greeks understood as the body's response to grief. The same word they used for mourning. They lay on the sand of an island whose name they did not yet know, and the sun moved overhead, and the stars came and went, and the waves came in and went out, and slowly, the way life always slowly reasserts itself, even in the wreckage, the ordinary necessities began to make themselves felt. Hunger, thirst, the smell of the pine forest above the beach. On the 3rd morning, Odysseus took his spear and went inland alone. The island was called Aiaia. You can still find a place by that name on old maps, or rather, a place that ancient geographers identified with it. Monte Circeo, on the coast of Lazio in western Italy, a great rocky promontory that juts into the Tyrrhenian Sea, like a fist, covered in dense woodland, separated from the mainland by a flat marsh that once may have been a shallow sea crossing. The Romans called it Circeum, and they believed, with that practical Roman confidence in placing myths exactly on the map, that this was where Circe had lived. Whether they were right is another of those questions that history answers with a gentle shrug and a perhaps. What matters is the kind of place it was. Dense, beautiful, wild, smelling of herbs and resin, and the particular dark green smell of a forest that has never been properly cleared, the kind of place where you could feel watched by the trees themselves. Odysseus climbed a ridge and looked inland. He saw smoke, one thin column of it rising from somewhere deep in the forest, pale against a pale sky. He went back to the men. The men did not want to investigate. This is entirely understandable. The last 2 times they had investigated an unfamiliar island, they had lost 72 men to Ciconian spears and watched 11 ships full of their companions smashed to splinters. The logic of not investigating any more islands was sound and human and reasonable. Some of them wept when Odysseus divided them into 2 groups. Some of them drew the lots for who would go into the forest with visible reluctance, as men draw lots for tasks they expect to be fatal. But the group that drew the short straws went. Led by Eurylochus, a solid, cautious man who trusted Odysseus, but trusted his own instincts perhaps a fraction more, which was, as it turned out, the one thing that would save his life. They found the palace through the trees, and here is where we must pause and let imagination do its work, Because Homer's description of Circe's home is one of the most quietly extraordinary in all the poem. It was not a fortress, not a cave, not a ruin. It was a palace, built of dressed stone, he says, in a clearing amid the trees, bright and well-ordered, with smoke rising from the hearth and the sound of a woman's voice coming from within. She was singing. She was weaving, both at once, the way ancient Mediterranean women did, the loom and the voice together, the same patient rhythmic work that Penelope was doing at that very moment on Ithaca, though the woman doing it here was something rather different from Penelope. Her name was Circe. She was a goddess, or near enough to one, daughter of Helios the sun and of the ocean nymph Perse, sister to Hades, who guarded the golden fleece in distant Colchis. She was a pharmacist of extraordinary skill, which is perhaps the most historically accurate way to understand her. The ancient Greek word pharmakeia means the use of drugs, both healing and harmful, and Circe was its mistress. Around her palace, moving through the trees with unnerving calm, were wolves and lions, but not wild animals. Men. Men she had transformed, their human minds still visible in their eyes, their animal bodies going through the motions of their new form with a kind of sad, confused patience. The men should have noticed the wolves' eyes, but they did not, or chose not to, and they called out to the singing woman, and she opened her shining doors and invited them in, all but Eurylochus. Something made him stop at the threshold, some instinct, the same kind that had made Odysseus moor his ship outside the Laestrygonians' harbour rather than sailing in with the others. Eurylochus stood at the door and watched his companions file inside and heard the door close behind them and felt in his bones the wrongness of it. He waited. He waited a long time. And then he walked back through the forest to the beach and told Odysseus, weeping as he told it, that the men had gone in and had not come out, and that the place was enchanted, and that he would not go back there for any man alive. Odysseus picked up his sword and his spear and went alone. He was halfway through the forest when he met the young man. You know who it was if you know the Greek world at all. A young man in winged sandals with a golden staff around which two serpents coiled, a staff whose touch could make the living sleep and the dead wake. A young man with the quick, bright eyes of someone who is always 3 steps ahead of the conversation. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, the guide of souls, the one deity in the entire Greek pantheon, who moved freely between all worlds, the upper, the middle, the lower, with equal ease and a certain elegant amusement at what he found in each. He stopped Odysseus on the forest path and told him very directly, and with the slightly impatient efficiency of someone delivering urgent information, exactly what he was walking into, and exactly what he needed to do about it. "Your men are pigs," Hermes said. Not metaphorically. Pigs. In a sty. Circe fed them a potion and touched them with her wand, and their minds are still theirs, but their bodies belong to the swineherd's world now. And if you walk into that palace without protection, the same will happen to you. Then he reached down and pulled a small plant from the earth at the forest path's edge. It was black at the root and white at the flower. Molly, he called it, one of those names that scholars have spent centuries trying to identify, proposing snowdrop, wild garlic, mandrake, even opium poppy. Whatever it was, Hermes pressed it into Odysseus's hand and explained its properties, and explained also exactly what Odysseus must do when the potion failed to work on him, which would be the moment Circe understood she had encountered something unusual. "Draw your sword," Hermes said. "Rush at her as if you mean to kill her. She will be afraid, and when she is afraid, she will offer terms. And when she offers terms, make sure the terms are worth accepting." The messenger god smiled his quick, complicated smile and was gone into the trees. Odysseus held the small plant in his hand and looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into his belt and walked on toward the palace. What followed was one of the strangest negotiations in ancient literature. Circe gave Odysseus the potion in a golden cup, in wine mixed with barley and cheese and honey. He drank it. Nothing happened. She touched him with her wand, a slender ivory thing, smooth with use, and said the words that had turned 20 men into 20 pigs. Nothing happened. Odysseus drew his sword. The goddess stepped back, and for the first time in what was clearly quite a long time, Circe of Aea was surprised, because mortals did not do this. Mortals drank the cup, became animals, forgot themselves. That was how this worked. But here was a man who drank and remained a man, who stood in her polished hall with iron in his hand, and she could see this very clearly, she was not without perception, had no intention of using it unless he had to. "You must be Odysseus," she said, just like that. The way you say the name of someone you have been expecting for a long time. Hermes had told her once that Odysseus would come, and here he was, and he was exactly what she had expected, and possibly more than she had expected, and the situation had arrived at the point of negotiation. Homer handles this scene with admirable brevity. Circe swore an oath by the gods, formally and binding, that she would do him no harm, that she would restore his men, that she would treat them all with proper hospitality. Odysseus sheathed his sword. The maids drew baths. The table was spread with food and wine. And then Odysseus sat at the polished table in Circe's bright hall and could not eat. "Why do you sit there like a mute man?" Circe asked him. "Are you afraid of me still?" He said, "My men are in a pigsty." She took her wand, the same wand, and went to the sty and touched each animal in turn, and the transformation worked in reverse. The bristles receded, the snouts shortened, the hooves became hands, and the men who stood blinking in the sunlight were themselves again, taller than before, younger looking somehow, weeping with a relief so profound it had no sound. Odysseus, watching, felt something move in his chest that was not quite grief and not quite joy, but the particular feeling of a man who has brought his people back from a place they were not meant to return from. He went back to the beach. He brought the rest of the men to the palace, and there, on the island of Aea, in the bright halls of a goddess who had tried to destroy them and had instead become their host, they stayed for a year. Let us not pretend this was entirely Circe's enchantment. The ancient text is honest about it in the way Homer is always honest about human weakness, straightforwardly, without judgment, simply reporting what happened. The men ate well, they slept in proper beds. The baths were hot, and the wine was good, and the goddess's maids attended to their every comfort, and there were no Cyclopes here, no Laestrygonians, no storms, no lots to draw for potentially fatal scouting missions. Odysseus himself spent his nights in Circe's bed and his days in her council. And there is a particular quality of forgetting that comfort enables, not the lotus flower forgetting, which was total and passive, but the more insidious human forgetting of a man whose immediate needs are all met, and who finds it possible day by day not to think about what lies beyond the next comfortable morning. It was his men who finally remembered for him. It was Eurylochus, cautious, practical Eurylochus, who had stood at Circe's threshold and turned back, who came to him at last and said, as plainly as you can say anything to a king, "We should go home. If we are ever going to go home, it is time." And Odysseus heard him and went to Circe and told her it was time. She did not argue. She did not weep or rage or deploy her considerable powers to prevent him. This is perhaps the most interesting thing about Circe in Homer's telling, that she was not ultimately a captor, but something more complicated and more dignified than that. She told him, "You cannot go home yet. There is something you must do first. There is a road you must travel that no living man has taken and returned from easily. You must go down to the house of death. You must speak to the ghost of Tiresias of Thebes, the blind prophet, who alone among the shades retains his full understanding. He will tell you what you need to know." Odysseus stared at her. "The road to the underworld," Circe said. "Sail north until the sun fails and the light is wrong. Follow the river ocean to its source. You will know the place when you reach it. Do the rites I will teach you. Dig a trench, pour libations, sacrifice a ram and a ewe. The dead will come." And so they sailed into a part of the world the ancient Greeks called simply the Edge, beyond the known Mediterranean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules perhaps, or simply to that psychological horizon where the sky meets the sea and the light stops working properly, where mist replaces clarity and the sound of the sea changes from something familiar to something else entirely. Historians have argued for centuries about where Homer imagined the entrance to the underworld to be. Some place it at the mouth of a river in Epirus, in northwestern Greece, where a sanctuary to the dead actually existed. The Necromanteion, a real stone temple where ancient Greeks came to commune with their ancestors through rituals of incubation and sacrifice, descending into underground chambers in the dark to hear the voices of the dead. Archaeological excavations there in the 1950s found the chambers, the iron chains, the ritual paraphernalia. The dead speak, apparently, when the conditions are right. The ancient world built a building for exactly that purpose. Whatever the geography, Odysseus found the place. He dug the trench as Circe had instructed, a pit roughly a cubit in each direction in the dark earth of the world's edge, and he poured into it the libations she had prescribed. First honey and milk, then sweet wine, then water, then white barley. He drew his sword to keep the shades from the blood until he had spoken to Tiresias. And then they cut the throats of the black ram and the black ewe, and the blood ran into the dark earth of the pit, and the dead came. They came the way water rises, silently from nowhere visible, suddenly simply there. Brides and young men and old men who had suffered much, and girls with grief still fresh in their faces, and warriors in armor still bearing the marks of their wounds, and they pressed toward the blood with an urgency that was not quite hunger, but was the closest thing the dead have to it, because blood, warm, living blood, was the one substance that could, briefly and temporarily, bring back the fullness of their minds. Odysseus held them back with his sword, alone in the dark, at the edge of the world, with the sound of thousands of dead gathering around him in the dim light. The first shade to reach him was Elpenor. This requires a moment of explanation, because Elpenor is one of the most quietly devastating presences in all of the Odyssey. Not a hero, not a great man, not someone the story has particularly foregrounded. He was simply one of the crew, a young man, not especially wise, not especially brave, who who had been staying in Circe's palace and who, on the last night before they sailed, had drunk too much wine and fallen asleep on the roof, the cool roof, away from the heat of the hall. And in the grey confusion of the early morning, when the men were rushing to prepare the ship, had risen too quickly, stepped the wrong way in the dark, and fallen from the roof to the ground and broken his neck. He had been left behind unburied in the rush and the grief of departure. And here he was, his ghost preceding even Tiresias to the blood pit, young and translucent, and not yet quite at peace with his sudden ending, asking for the only thing the dead can ask of the living. Remember me. Bury me properly. Give me a grave marker. Let me not lie unburied on Circe's shore. Odysseus promised him, and he kept the promise. This is important. When they returned to Aea, they built Elpenor a funeral pyre and set his armor on top and raised a burial mound above him with his own oar for a grave marker, the oar he had pulled in life. It cost them nothing but time and care. But in the ancient world's understanding of the relationship between the living and the dead, it was everything. Tiresias came to the blood with the authority of a man who has been waiting. He was blind, had been blind in life, the gods having taken his sight in exchange for the gift of prophecy, which is an ancient equation that appears in cultures across the world. The inner eye opens as the outer eyes close. He drank the blood and looked at Odysseus with sightless eyes that nonetheless saw him entirely, and he told him what he needed to know. The journey home was possible. Difficult and costly, but possible. The great danger lay ahead on the island of Thrinacia, where the sun god Helios kept his sacred cattle, animals that must not be touched, must not be harmed, must not under any circumstances be eaten. If his men kept their hands off those cattle, they would reach Ithaca, though not without suffering. If they did not, if hunger or desperation or the plain human inability to leave a thing alone drove them to slaughter the sacred herd, then the ship would be destroyed and the men would die, and Odysseus would come home alone on a stranger's vessel to find trouble waiting for him in his own halls. The old blind prophet finished speaking, bowed slightly, and stepped back from the blood. Odysseus let his mother come forward. He had not known she was dead. That is the sentence that stops every reader of the Odyssey somewhere around the middle of Book 11 and stops them cold. He had left her alive when he sailed for Troy 20 years ago. He had not known. Her name was Anticlea, and she was here among the shades, and she was waiting her turn with the patience that the dead must learn whether they are ready for it or not. She drank the blood and recognized him instantly. My child. Just those two words in the darkness at the world's edge, and every other story in the Odyssey momentarily stops for them. She told him what he needed to know and could not have learned any other way. Penelope was faithful, still weaving, still waiting, still refusing the men who had come to press their claims on Ithaca's vacant throne. Telemachus was alive and growing, no longer a child, already a young man learning his way in the world. His old father Laertes lived in poverty and grief on the farm, refusing the comforts of the palace, sleeping in the dirt because the palace without his son was a place he could not bear to inhabit properly. And she herself, she had died of longing. Not illness, not accident. The grief of his absence had been the cause, she told him simply and without accusation. She missed him. She missed him until there was nothing left. And then she was here. 3 times Odysseus tried to hold her. 3 times his arms passed through her, finding nothing. Shadow, the memory of warmth, the shape of his mother without the substance of her. The dead cannot be held. The living cannot cross that particular boundary no matter how much they need to. He reached for her, and each time his hands found only air and the cold of the world's edge, and finally he stopped reaching and simply looked at her face, the face he had last seen 20 years ago on the dock at Ithaca, until it faded back into the general dark. "Do not grieve too much," she said to him, dissolving. "This is the way of mortals when we die." Others came. Agamemnon came, great Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, commander of the Greek forces at Troy, who had not survived his homecoming. His own wife had killed him, with her lover's help, in his own bath on the night of his return. He came to the blood full of bitterness and warning. Do not trust too easily when you reach Ithaca. Come home in secret. Check what is waiting before you show yourself. The great general, brought low not by any enemy but by the hearth that was supposed to welcome him. Achilles came, the greatest warrior who had ever lived, the golden-haired near-divine Achilles, whose death at Troy had seemed to make some kind of cosmic sense. A hero's death, a glorious death. The death the heroic code said was better than a long grey life. He came to the blood, and Odysseus told him he was honored among the dead, that his glory lived forever among the living. And Achilles said something that no one who reads it ever quite forgets. "Do not speak to me smoothly of death, Odysseus. I would rather be a hired laborer on earth, working for a poor man with little land, than be king over all the dead." One sentence, the entire heroic code, the glory-seeking, the willingness to die young for a great name. Questioned, reconsidered, refused, in one sentence, by the very man whose life had been its highest expression. It is one of the moments in ancient literature where you feel the poet's own hand most clearly, slipping behind the story to say something true about the human experience of death, told from the inside of it. Odysseus watched Achilles stride away into the darkness, taking long steps, going quickly, as if even in death there was somewhere to be. Then the dead pressed closer. Too many, too loud, too urgent. And fear moved through him for the first time since he had arrived at this place. A sudden visceral fear, not of any single shade, but of all of them together, pressing toward the warmth of the living. And he turned and ran for the ship, and shouted for the men to row, and they rowed hard and fast, away from the edge of the world and back into the ordinary dark of the ocean night. Behind them, the land of the dead fell back into its silence. Ahead of them, Aea waited, Circe's island, the smell of pine and herbs and wood smoke, the bright hall, the warm beds. They would go back there first, as they had promised Elpenor. They would bury him properly, with his oar, with his armor, with the grief he deserved. And Circe would meet them on the shore, because she had known precisely when they would return. She was the daughter of the sun, and the sun sees everything. And she would feed them and let them rest. And then, in the early hours before dawn, she would come to Odysseus alone and tell him everything else he needed to know about what lay ahead. The Sirens, Scylla and Charybdis, the cattle of the sun. She would lay it all out for him, patient and precise, the complete itinerary of the suffering still to come. And he would listen in the gray pre-dawn light of her island with the particular expression of a man who knows the road is hard but has stopped being surprised by hardness, who has been to the land of the dead and heard his mother's voice and tried to hold her and found only air, and who is still going. There is something Circe told him in the last grey hour before dawn, standing on the shore of Aea with the sea at her back and the firelit palace behind her and her dark hair loose in the morning wind, that Odysseus carried with him like a stone in the chest for every mile of what followed. She told him not all of it could be avoided. She told him that some of what was coming was the price of the journey itself. Not punishment, not divine cruelty, not even fate exactly, but simply the nature of the road between where he was and where he needed to be. There were passages that could only be navigated, not circumvented. Dangers that could only be endured, not solved. She gave him every tool she could give him. She told him what to do and what not to do, and what would happen if he did it anyway. She was thorough and precise, and she did not soften any of it, because she was not that kind of goddess. Then she watched him walk down to the ship, and she was still standing on the shore when they rowed out of the cove, growing smaller behind them as the distance opened up, until she was a dark point on a pale shore, and then nothing at all, and Aea was just another island receding behind the stern. Ahead of them, the Tyrrhenian Sea opened wide and blue and very still. They had buried Elpenor that morning, built his pyre on the headland, laid his armor on top, raised his mound, planted his oar in the earth above him. Done it properly, with fire and grief and the words that should be said. It had taken the better part of the morning, and it was right that it had. Odysseus had promised the young man's ghost, and he kept his promises. This was one of the things the story is insistent about, one of the qualities that distinguishes him from luckier men who never needed to promise anything to anyone. He kept his word, even to the dead, especially to the dead. The oars moved. The coast of Italy, if that is what it was, fell away behind them. Somewhere ahead, Circe had told him, was the island of the Sirens. Let us spend a moment here with the Sirens, because they deserve more than the brief cameo they are usually given. The beeswax, the mast, the famous image that has traveled through 3,000 years of Western art and literature and shows no signs of stopping. They deserve the full weight of what Homer actually wrote about them, which is considerably stranger and more interesting than the simple danger of a beautiful song. The Sirens in Homer are not mermaids. That image came later, centuries later, from a confusion with other sea creatures, from the medieval imagination that likes to blend its monsters into new shapes. In Homer, they are bird women, the body of a great bird, the head and voice of a woman, sitting in a meadow on a small island surrounded by something Homer describes as a vast heap of moldering corpses, bones on which hangs the shriveled skin. Which is to say, every sailor who had ever heard them had not turned around and sailed away. They had stopped, they had listened, and they had remained in the meadow with the singing women and the bones, until there was nothing left of them but more bones to add to the heap. But here is what the Sirens actually sang, and this is the part that most retellings quietly omit, because it changes the nature of the danger entirely. They did not sing of pleasure. They did not sing of rest or comfort or love or the relief of stopping. They sang of knowledge. Their song, as Homer gives it, promises Odysseus that they know everything, all that has come to pass on the fertile earth, all the deeds of the Trojan War, all the history of the Greeks and Trojans, all the suffering and glory of the 10 years fighting. They offer him the complete story, everything he had lived through rendered perfect and comprehensible and whole. Think about that for a moment. Think about what it means for the danger to be not pleasure, but understanding, not rest, but the promise of finally knowing the full shape of everything that has happened to you. The Sirens were not offering oblivion, like the lotus. They were offering the opposite of oblivion. They were offering meaning, the kind of absolute crystalline meaning that human life very rarely provides and that every thinking person hungers for at some level, always. The complete story, all of it, right there. Just stop the ship, just listen a little longer. This is why Odysseus wanted to hear them. Not weakness, not self-indulgence. The same intelligence that had got him through every other obstacle was the thing that made the Sirens' offer specifically, particularly, almost irresistibly dangerous to him. A lesser man might have plugged his ears alongside everyone else and rode past without much regret. But Odysseus had been to the underworld. He had heard Achilles say that glory was worth nothing compared to life. He had held his mother and found nothing. He wanted to understand. He wanted the whole story given to him clean and clear and complete. He put beeswax in the ears of every man on the ship, and he had them tie him to the mast. Circe had given them the beeswax, a large block of it, yellow and waxy with the faint smell of old honey. Odysseus cut it into pieces with his sword edge and warmed the pieces in his hands until the heat of his palms and the Mediterranean sun made them soft and pliable. And then he pressed a piece into each man's ears in turn, working down the rowing benches one man at a time, until the ship had become a silent place, inhabited by men whose world had suddenly reduced to what they could see. No sound, no wind noise, no water sound, no voices, just the visual world, moving around them in silence. Then they tied him to the mast, not loosely, firmly with real rope and real knots, hands behind his back and feet lashed at the ankles, and the rope wound multiple times around the mast housing so that pulling against it would accomplish nothing. Circe had been very specific about the binding because Circe understood something that Odysseus understood intellectually, but could not quite feel in advance, that when the song reached him, everything he knew about why he was tied to the mast would remain completely intact in his mind, and he would still want more than anything in the world to be free of it. He would understand perfectly well that the song was dangerous. He would know with full clarity that listening had killed every sailor who had ever done it, and none of that knowledge would make the slightest difference to what his body would be telling him to do. The wind dropped. The sea went flat and breathless. This is a detail worth noting because Homer includes it as simply as he includes the weather in any other passage. The wind dropped as they approached the island, leaving them in a dead calm that required the men to row. No supernatural explanation is offered. No god is named. The wind simply dropped, the way wind does on the Mediterranean on summer mornings when the thermal patterns shift, and the sails hung loose and useless, and the oars dipped into glassy water that caught the sky in it like a mirror. And then Odysseus heard the song. Homer gives us only a fragment of what was sung, barely 4 lines in the original Greek, barely enough to catch the shape of the thing before it dissolves again into narrative. But those 4 lines have been enough to haunt the Western imagination for nearly 3,000 years, which says something important about the nature of what was being offered. We know all the suffering the Greeks and Trojans endured on the broad plains of Troy by the will of the gods. We know all that happens on the fertile earth. The voices were very beautiful. This almost goes without saying, but Homer says it anyway, and the word he uses, limpid, clear, and bright, carries the quality of a mountain stream, of water you can see to the bottom of, of something that has no impurity in it. The song had that quality. It was completely clear. It was the most completely clear thing Odysseus had ever heard, and in it he could feel, not just hear, but feel throughout his body, the shape of the knowledge they were offering him. All of it. Everything. The beginning and the end, and the full meaning of the middle, rendered simple and navigable at last. He pulled against the ropes. He pulled with every muscle he had, and the ropes held, and he pulled harder, and they held again, and he turned to the men at the oars, and his mouth shaped the words, "Untie me, please. Untie me now," with every ounce of authority and desperation he possessed. And the men at the oars looked at him with their stopped ears and saw a man shouting at them and rowed harder, because those had been their instructions. Perimedes and Eurylochus came down the ship toward him, and not to untie him, to add more rope, more knots, tighter bonds around the mast, as he had told them to do, if he begged. He begged. He is not ashamed of having begged, or Homer is not ashamed on his behalf, because the text simply records it without judgment. He begged, and the men added more rope, and the ship rode on through the flat water, and the song grew slightly closer, and then slightly further, and then slowly, very slowly, began to fade, the way music fades when the distance finally wins. And then it was gone. The men cleared the wax from their ears. They untied him. He stood at the mast for a moment on legs that were not entirely steady, looking back at the island that was already behind them, growing smaller, the bones in the meadow invisible from this distance, the singing already becoming a memory that had the quality of something experienced in deep sleep, vivid and total, and already slightly wrong around the edges. He thought about what the song had promised. He thought, I will never know that. I will never have the complete story. I will live in the middle of it, like everyone else, until the end. He breathed. He walked back to the stern and took the steering oar. Ahead, the water changed color. There are places in the Mediterranean where the sea does something that experienced sailors recognize immediately and inexperienced sailors find deeply unnerving. It begins to move in a way that is not entirely explained by the wind or the current, a rotation that comes from somewhere deeper than the surface, a tendency of the water to gather itself into a slow turning that, if you watch it long enough, seems purposeful. The Strait of Messina, the narrow channel between Sicily and the toe of Italy's boot, barely 3 kilometers wide at its narrowest, has this quality in certain tidal conditions. The currents from 2 seas meet there and produce effects that ancient sailors described as monstrous, because monstrous was the only vocabulary available for something that felt intentional but had no visible cause. Charybdis, the whirlpool. 3 times a day, Homer tells us, it swallowed the sea down to the bare rock of the seafloor, and 3 times a day it vomited it back up in a roaring mass of foam and dark water. On one bank of the strait, and on the other bank, in an overhanging cliff concealed in fog, Scylla. Circe had told him the choice, and it was not, in any meaningful sense, a choice. Charybdis was absolute. If the whirlpool took the ship, there was nothing, no strength, no cleverness, no divine assistance that could get it back. It would be over, completely and finally, and all the years of war and wandering and loss would end not in Ithaca, but in the bottom of a sea drain. Scylla, on the other hand, was a guaranteed loss of 6 men. 1 for each of her 6 heads, but it was a loss that could be survived. A ship could pass Scylla with 6 fewer crew members. A ship could not pass Charybdis at all. so there was no choice. There was only a very clear calculation dressed up in the language of choice to make it slightly more bearable. He did not tell the men about Scylla. This is one of the decisions the story records without flinching, another of those honest human moments that make Odysseus three-dimensional rather than heroic in the clean, uncomplicated sense. He told them about Charybdis. Row hard and stay close to the far cliff wall. Keep away from the whirlpool. Row as if your lives depend on it, because they do. And he did not tell them that the cliff wall was where Scylla lived. He had thought about arming himself and standing at the prow and fighting Scylla as the ship passed, because that is what the heroic code suggested a man should do. Circe had talked him out of it with the patient logic of someone explaining a mathematical proof. You cannot fight Scylla. She has 6 heads on 6 long necks, and she strikes faster than a man can see. If you stand at the prow with your weapons, you will accomplish nothing except reducing the number of men available to row, and rowing is the one thing that will keep Charybdis from taking everyone. He stood at the prow anyway, unarmed, just stood there, watching the cliff. The entrance to the strait was narrow, and the current was strong, and the whirlpool was audible before it was visible. A low, churning groan from the left side of the channel that grew as they approached until it was less a sound and more a vibration felt through the hull, through the oar handles, through the soles of the feet. The men were rowing with the frantic, concentrated energy of people who can hear something terrible and are choosing not to look at it. And the ship moved through the channel fast enough that the cliffs were a blur on either side. Odysseus looked at the right cliff wall. He did not see Scylla until she moved. She moved from her fog-concealed cave the way a very large animal moves when it has been waiting, with an absolute confidence in its own speed that does not require urgency. 6 necks extending from the cliff top, each one long as a ship's mast, each one ending in a head with 3 rows of fangs. Homer's description is detailed and almost clinical, as if he wanted to make sure the reader understood exactly what this was, which was not a metaphor. The 6 heads went down to the ship simultaneously, moving over the hull like a man reaching for bread from a bowl, and they came back up with 6 men. 6 men. Odysseus had known it was coming, had known since Circe told him, had calculated it in the night and in the morning and at every moment since, and knowing made no difference. The men screamed his name. He heard them. He heard them from the prow where he stood, calling out to him by name with their hands reaching toward him as they were lifted, and he could not move fast enough, could not do anything, because there was nothing to be done. And he stood there and watched the 6 heads rise back to the cliff with 6 of his men held in those terrible mouths, still alive, still reaching, until the fog closed over them, and they were gone. He called it later the most heart-wrenching thing he saw in all his wanderings on the sea. Not the Cyclops, not the underworld, not his mother dissolving at his touch. This 6 men who trusted him, who had survived everything else, taken above his head by a creature he could not fight, while he stood 6 feet away with his hands at his sides. The surviving men rowed. They rowed without speaking. They came through the strait and out the other side into open water, and they rowed until the cliffs were behind them, and the sound of the whirlpool faded, and the sea opened up ahead into the wide, indifferent blue, and then one by one they stopped rowing and sat with their heads bowed and the oars dripping, and nobody said anything for a long time. Ahead of them lay Thrinacia. The island was beautiful in the way that the most dangerous things often are. Green and lush and warm, with shallow bays and fresh water and good anchorage. The kind of coast that a sailor after weeks at sea looks at and feels the body relax before the mind has decided anything. And on the hillsides, moving through the long grass in the golden afternoon light, were the cattle of Helios. Odysseus had known about them since Tiresias, warned twice by the blind prophet in the underworld and by Circe on the shore of Aea. The words were almost identical in both instances, which is Homer's way of underlining something important. Do not touch the cattle. Whatever happens, whatever the reason, however hungry, do not touch them. The cattle of the sun god were immortal. They did not breed, they did not die. They simply existed in their eternal lowing contentment on the hillside, tended by two of Helios's daughters, Phaethusa and Lampetie, who were also in some sense extensions of their father's watchfulness. Odysseus did not want to stop at all. He said so directly and plainly as the island appeared on the horizon. We should row past. We have enough supplies. We know what is here, and we know what it costs. Let us row past. Eurylochus said no, not alone. The crew said it with him, the accumulated exhaustion and grief of everything they had been through speaking in a single voice. 6 men gone to Scylla, 12 ships become one. Years away from home, years of monsters and gods and storms and loss, and now here was a green island with fresh water and good grass and shelter, and their leader wanted them to row past it in the dark. Eurylochus put into words what everyone was feeling. We are not made of iron. We cannot row forever. Let us rest here through the night on the shore with the ship safe, and in the morning we will sail. We will not touch the cattle. Odysseus looked at his men's faces. He made them swear. A formal oath by whatever god still had any interest in their welfare, sworn on the deck of the ship in the fading afternoon light. They would not touch the cattle of the sun. They swore it. And then they rowed into the bay and pulled the ship ashore and made their camp on the green grass of Thrinacia. The gods sent a south wind that night. It blew without stopping day after day, pinning them to the island while the provisions ran out. A week, 2 weeks, a month. They fished and hunted birds and ate what the island offered, and the island's offer grew smaller day by day, and the cattle moved through the grass on the hillsides with their eternal slow contentment, and the men grew thinner. Odysseus prayed. He walked inland and found a sheltered hollow away from the sea and the smell of the cattle, and he knelt in the grass and prayed to every god he could name for guidance, for wind, for anything. And the god's answer on this occasion was sleep. A deep, sudden, involuntary sleep that took him where he knelt, as completely as a blow to the head, leaving him there in the hollow while the afternoon wore on around him, and the wind continued from the south. He woke to the smell of roasting meat. The men had been hungry for a long time, which does not make what they did right, but makes it human. Eurylochus had led it. He had used exactly the kind of logic that desperation generates. They were going to die on this island anyway, he had argued, if the wind did not change. Better to die well-fed and make a proper sacrifice to Helios and promise to build him a fine temple when they reached home, if they reached home, than to die slowly of hunger on a green island within sight of the thing that could save them. It was the logic of a man who has stopped believing in his own future and is managing the present. The cattle of Helios had flanks like polished bronze and horns that curved like crescent moons, and they had walked toward the men with the fearless trust of animals that had never been harmed, and the men had cut their throats on the green grass of Thrinacia with the bronze knives they used for everything, and built their fires, and the fat ran in the flames, and the smell rose into the air and climbed into the sky where the daughters of Helios could see it from wherever they watched. Lampetie ran to her father with the news, and Odysseus, waking in his hollow to the smell of it, walked back to the camp and stood at the edge of the firelight and looked at his men eating and felt the bottom drop out of everything. "Father Zeus," he said, into the sky above him, into the evening air, "you put me to sleep, and while I slept my men committed this monstrous crime." The sky did not answer, but he knew with the same certainty a man knows when he has made a mistake that cannot be unmade, that the answer was coming. They stayed for 6 days after that, because there was nothing else to do. They ate the cattle. They had killed them. They could not bring them back, and the living needed to eat. They made the sacrifices Eurylochus had promised. They burned the thigh bones and poured wine over the flames, and did everything that ritual required. It meant nothing. There are moments when the correct forms cannot save you, when the thing done is too much for ceremony to address. The fires burned with an unnatural quality that the men tried not to notice. The roasting flesh moved on the spits, making sounds like living cattle, making sounds that were not the sounds roasting meat should make, and the skins on the ground arranged themselves and rearranged themselves in the night, and the men drank more wine to stop noticing. On the 7th day, the south wind dropped. They launched the ship immediately, rowed hard out of the bay and into open water, raised the sail when the wind came from the west, and set their heading north, and felt briefly, perhaps an hour, perhaps less, the familiar thin hope of a ship making progress toward home. Then Zeus struck, not metaphorically, not gradually, a black cloud from the west, arriving faster than any natural weather, and inside it lightning that came down into the sea ahead of them and behind them and on both sides, and a wind that hit the sail and blew it out of the rings in the first gust, and a sea that went from manageable to impossible between one stroke of the oars and the next. The mast snapped at the base and came down across the deck, carrying the forestay with it, and the forestay caught the helmsman across the skull, and he went into the water without a sound. One by one the men went into the sea, some called down by the storm, some knocked from the benches by the impact of waves, the color of black iron, some simply swallowed by a sea that had decided this was where their story ended. Odysseus lashed himself to the broken mast and the keel with a length of oxhide rope and held on. The ship broke apart around him, piece by piece, in the screaming dark. When the storm passed, there was nothing left. No ship, no sail, no crew, no sound except the breathing of the sea, which was already calming, the way the sea always calms after a storm, indifferently, without remorse, simply returning to its base condition of blue and quiet. Odysseus floated on the mast and keel in the growing silence and felt the full weight of what the story had become. Every man, every last one. 12 ships he had left Troy with, and now not even one. 300 men had followed him out of the harbour of Ithaca, and now he was alone on a broken spar in the middle of the Mediterranean with no land visible in any direction. The current carried him. He drifted through the night and through a morning and into another afternoon, and the current, which may have been Poseidon's current, carrying him to the place the god intended, brought him back to the strait he had passed through. back to Charybdis. He arrived at the worst possible time, as the whirlpool was in full draw, pulling down from the surface to the bare rock below, and the current took his makeshift raft and drew it toward the lip of the vortex. He grabbed at the rock wall above him. A fig tree grew there, from a crack in the cliff above the whirlpool, and he grabbed its branches and held on the way he had held on to everything all this time, with the brute refusal of a man who is not yet ready to arrive at the end of his story, while the whirlpool sucked the mast and keel down into itself and took them and held them in the dark water below. He hung from the fig tree above the void and waited. Hours, long hours, with the sea below him circling and groaning in its slow rotation, and the sun tracking overhead, and his arms burning with the effort of it, and nothing to do but wait. And then, as Circe had told him, as Tiresias had implied, the whirlpool turned, and the water came back up, and the mast and keel came back up with it, and he dropped from the fig tree onto the wood and paddled away from the cliff wall with his hands, and did not look back. He paddled for 10 days. On the 10th day, an island appeared on the horizon, growing slowly from a grey suggestion into something real and solid and green. And he paddled toward it because there was nowhere else to go, and because 10 days on a broken spar on the open ocean tends to reduce your options to the very simple ones. He reached the shore. He pulled himself out of the water onto a beach of soft white sand and lay there with his face in the sand and the waves coming in and going out around him, and simply breathed in and out, in and out. The sand was warm. The island was quiet. Somewhere in the trees above the beach, birds were singing ordinary bird songs, the kind that require no heroism to survive, the kind that have no meaning beyond the fact of their own beauty. He had lost everything, everyone. He was alive. The island was called Ogygia, and the goddess who lived there, who would find him on the beach that evening and look at him with eyes that had been watching the sea for a very long time, was named Calypso. The island of Ogygia is one of the most debated locations in all of ancient geography. Ancient writers placed it in various parts of the Mediterranean and beyond, some in the Ionian Sea, some further west, some as far as the Atlantic, past the Pillars of Hercules, past the edge of the navigable world. The Greek historian Plutarch, writing in the 1st century of the Common Era, placed it 5 days' sail west of Britain, which puts it somewhere in the open Atlantic, a place that would have felt to ancient Mediterranean sailors like the uttermost rim of the world, a place so far removed from the warm known sea of their lives that it might as well be the moon. The name Calypso in ancient Greek means she who conceals or she who covers over, from the same root as the word for a burial shroud. The name of the island, Ogygia, carries associations with what is primordial and before time, the very ancient, the deep old, the thing that was there before the stories started. Which is to say, Odysseus had washed up alone on the shore of the world's concealment. Calypso found him there on the evening of the day he arrived, lying face down on the white sand, with the ruins of his raft scattered in the surf around him. She was, Homer tells us, extraordinarily beautiful, a divine goddess, lovely haired, and she lived in a cave on the island that was wound about with grapevines and sweet-smelling cypress and alder. And at the cave's entrance 4 streams ran in different directions through a meadow of violet and parsley, and the whole place had the quality of a landscape that has been perfectly arranged by someone with limitless patience and no particular need to be anywhere else. She took him in. She fed him, clothed him. healed the wounds of the sea. She was not unkind. This is important to understand, because the story is sometimes told as if she were simply a captor, a monster in a beautiful body, keeping a man prisoner for her own pleasure. But Homer's Calypso is more complicated and more sorrowful than that. She was in love with him, genuinely and entirely in love with him, in the way that only beings who have very little to do and very much time to feel it can be in love, completely, without reservation, with the full weight of an immortal heart that does not know how to be careful with its own feelings. She offered him everything she had. She offered him, specifically, the one thing no other woman, human or divine, could offer: immortality. Stay with her, and he would never age, never die, never lose anyone again, never be alone in a world that had already taken so much from him. He said no. Every day for 7 years, in one way or another, he said no. This is the image that Homer gives us first when he finally introduces us to Odysseus. Not the warrior, not the schemer, not the man of many devices and endless adaptability. The first image of Odysseus in the Odyssey is this: a man sitting alone on a rock at the water's edge, his eyes wet with tears, staring out at the sea. Every day, Homer tells us, every day he went to the shore and sat among the rocks and looked at the water, the open water, the direction of home, and wept, not secretly, not briefly, as a daily practice, as a ritual almost, the way some people pray, going to the same place at the same time each day and doing the same thing, because the act of doing it is itself the refusal to stop. He was not happy with Calypso. He slept beside her each night because the situation required it, and because the situation was not entirely without its consolations, and Homer is honest enough to say so. But every morning he walked back to the shore and looked at the sea and missed Ithaca with an intensity that 7 years had not diminished by any measurable amount. Grief, when it is attached to something real, does not obey the laws of ordinary erosion. Time wore at it, but did not wear it down. The longing was as clear at the beginning of the 7th year as it had been at the end of the 1st. Think of what had brought him here. Think of the full weight of everything that lay between Ithaca and this shore. 10 years of war, a storm at Cape Malea, 72 men dead in Thrace, lotus flowers, a giant's cave, 11 ships sunk in a cannibal harbour, the underworld, 6 men taken by Scylla, the sacred cattle, the last ship destroyed by Zeus's own thunderbolt, every companion gone. He was the only one left, the last man of a fleet of 300 who had sailed out of Ithaca's harbour on a summer morning 2 decades ago, full of the particular confidence of men embarking on something large and defined and purposeful. He was, by any reckoning, a man who had every reason in the world to accept what was being offered. Stay. Be immortal. Let the sea have the journey and keep the destination. Every morning he went to the shore and looked at the water. He wept for home, Homer says, since the nymph no longer pleased him. 3,000 years of readers have found something clarifying in that sentence. Not that she had done anything wrong, not that the island was not beautiful, simply that she was not Ithaca, and the island was not home, and beauty without belonging is a very particular kind of emptiness that does not fill no matter how much of it you pour in. It was Athena who finally moved things. The gray-eyed goddess, Odysseus's particular champion among the Olympians, had kept a careful and somewhat guilty distance during the years of the wandering. Careful because Poseidon's anger at her protégé was genuine and powerful, and she had no desire to escalate a divine conflict on behalf of one mortal man, guilty because the watching had been painful and the distance had sometimes felt like abandonment. Now she went to Zeus on Olympus and made her case plainly. It had been long enough. Poseidon could not maintain his anger forever against a man who had already lost everything. It was time. Let him go home. Zeus, who had been watching too, and who had his own complicated feelings about the whole affair, agreed. He sent Hermes down to Ogygia with a message for Calypso, delivered with the quick, polished efficiency of a god who does not enjoy delivering unwelcome news. Odysseus must be released. Zeus commands it. He is destined to return. Calypso heard this and was angry, quietly, deeply, with the restrained fury of someone who has been overruled by a power they cannot fight. And then she was something else, something underneath the anger that had no clean name. She went to find Odysseus on his rock by the sea, and she told him he was free to go. He was, Homer says, immediately suspicious. This is perhaps the most perfectly Odyssean detail in the entire epic. A man hears he is to be released from 7 years of unwanted captivity, and his first response is not joy, but wariness, not gratitude, but a request for an oath. She swore it formally, and then, only then, did he allow himself to believe it. They ate together that last evening in her cave. The fire burned and the food was good and the wine was excellent, and Calypso said something to him that cuts through the centuries with surprising clarity. If you knew the full measure of suffering that still awaits you before you reach home, you would stay here with me and become immortal. Surely I am not less beautiful than your Penelope? And Odysseus said, No, you are a goddess and she is mortal, and there is no comparison, and yet I want to go home. It is not a question of beauty, it is a question of belonging. He did not say it so smoothly. The ancient text is rougher and more direct than that, but that is what it means. The goddess who could give him everything, beauty, comfort, eternity, was offering him a life without Ithaca in it, and a life without Ithaca was not, for him, a life he recognized as his own. The longing was not rational. It was not calculable. It was simply the deepest fact about him, deeper than cleverness, deeper than survival instinct, deeper than 20 years of evidence that going home was going to cost him more than staying would. He would go home. He built the raft himself. Calypso showed him where the largest trees grew and gave him the tools, a bronze axe, an adze, augers for boring. And he worked for 4 days in the forest, felling and shaping and lashing, building something that was not a ship exactly, but was a platform for crossing the sea, a raft of 20 tree trunks with a mast and sail, and a steering oar, solid and seaworthy in the practical way that a man builds things when he knows there is no one else to build them for him. On the 5th day, Calypso bathed him and dressed him in clean, fragrant clothes and loaded the raft with water and provisions and dark wine. And she sent a warm, fair wind from the west. He sailed alone for 17 days. 17 days on the open sea on a timber raft, navigating by the stars at night, keeping the bear to his left, as Calypso had instructed, which means he was sailing east, back toward the Mediterranean, back toward the world he knew. He did not sleep at night. He watched the stars, the Pleiades, Bodas setting late, Orion, the bear that never sets, that circles the pole without descending to the sea. He had navigated by these stars his entire sailing life, and they were the most reliable things he had left, the one constant that had not changed or failed or been taken from him in 20 years of everything else changing and failing and being taken. On the 18th day, the mountains of Scheria appeared on the horizon, dark and promising, and Poseidon, returning from a visit to the Ethiopians where he had been eating and drinking and temporarily pleased with the world, looked down and saw Odysseus on his raft in the open sea almost at the Phaeacian shore, and felt the old anger rise fresh and complete. He raised his trident and called the winds, and the sea answered him with everything it had, waves like cliffs, a sky gone black in minutes, the raft spinning and then capsizing, Odysseus in the water, the clothing Calypso had given him dragging him down. A sea nymph named Leucothea, Ino she had been called when she was mortal before the sea took her, saw him struggling in the waves and took pity. She gave him her veil, a white cloth with divine properties. Wrap it around your chest, and it will keep you alive in the water. When you reach the shore, throw it back into the sea. He took it. He swam for 2 days and 2 nights. The sea threw him against a rocky coast, and the surf tore at him, and he held onto the rocks until the skin was gone from his palms, and then a river mouth opened in the cliffs, and the current gentled, and he swam into it, and came to shore on smooth ground, and lay down in the rushes, and threw the veil back into the sea without looking, as instructed, and the river covered him in the dark, and he slept. He slept like a man who has not properly slept in 20 years. The Phaeacians were, according to ancient sources, a people of extraordinary seamanship and extraordinary hospitality, a maritime culture whose ships were said to navigate without helmsmen, guided purely by the will of their sailors, capable of crossing any sea in a day and a night. Scholars have proposed various real locations for Scheria. Their island, Corfu, is the most commonly suggested, lying as it does at the entrance to the Adriatic, accessible from the open Mediterranean. But whatever their geography, their culture, as Homer describes it, was the culture of people who understood the sea and understood strangers arriving from it, and treated both with respect. Their princess found him first. Nausicaa was at the river mouth with her maids, washing clothes in the morning and playing a ball game afterward in the sunlight, when the ball sailed wide, and the shriek of the maids, who went to retrieve it, woke the man sleeping in the rushes. He woke to a world of young women in white, sunlit, and the sea behind them, and the rational and entirely understandable impulse to not appear threatening was somewhat complicated by the fact that he had nothing on, the sea having taken Calypso's clothes along with everything else. He broke a branch from a bush to hold in front of him and stepped out of the reeds. The maids scattered. Nausicaa stood her ground, which Homer notes with approval. It takes steadiness of character to hold still when a salt-crusted, brine-darkened, entirely naked man emerges from a river in the early morning. Odysseus addressed her from a respectful distance with a speech of considerable elegance given the circumstances, praising her composure, comparing her to a palm tree he had once seen at Delos, asking for nothing but a scrap of cloth and some directions. She laughed. She gave him clothes and food and olive oil for bathing, and sent him ahead to her father's palace. King Alcinous received him warmly, because hospitality was sacred, and because the king was also, it must be said, quietly charmed by this weathered, intelligent stranger, whose name he did not yet know. There was a feast. There were songs and games, and the telling of stories. And at the feast, a blind singer named Demodocus sang of the fall of Troy, specifically of the wooden horse and the Greek warriors hiding inside it. And Odysseus, sitting in the hall among the Phaeacians who did not know who he was, wept into his cloak and tried to hide it and failed. Alcinous saw, and he asked gently but directly who his guest was. Odysseus raised his head and told them, "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes, known to all men for my cunning. My home is Ithaca, and I will tell you everything." He told them everything. 3 nights, some scholars estimate, of telling books 9 through 12 of the Odyssey, the great account of the wandering, the Cyclops and the Lotus-Eaters, and Circe and the underworld, and the Sirens and Scylla, and the cattle of the sun, and the wreck and Calypso. He told it all, and the Phaeacians listened without moving, and when he was done, the hall was silent for a long moment with the weight of it. Then Alcinous promised him a ship. They loaded the ship with gifts, bronze and gold and fine fabric, more than Odysseus had left Troy with, more than any single wandering man deserved by any rational accounting, given simply because the Phaeacians were people who understood that some debts are not between individuals, but between humanity and its own capacity for generosity. They rowed out in the evening. Odysseus lay on the deck and slept, genuinely slept, the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a man who has at last done everything that could be done. And the Phaeacian rowers, who needed no helmsman, who navigated by something other than instruction, pulled through the night. He was still asleep when they arrived. They carried him ashore on Ithaca while he slept, lifting him carefully in his blankets like something precious and fragile, laying him on the sand of a cove he had known since childhood, placing his gifts around him, and rowing away in the dark with the quiet efficiency of people who have done their part of the story and know it. He woke alone on an unfamiliar beach. The mist was heavy. Athena had wrapped it around the cove to buy him time and privacy, and for a long, disorienting moment he did not know where he was. The coast looked wrong. The trees looked wrong. He had been gone 20 years, and the island had changed, or he had changed, or both. And he stood on the sand of his own home in the gray morning mist and did not recognize it. Then Athena appeared, in the shape of a young shepherd, clear-eyed and composed, and told him where he was. The mist lifted, and there was Ithaca. The harbour mouth, the hill he had climbed as a boy, the cave of the nymphs at the cove's edge where he had played as a child and where the gifts were already being stored, the smell of the air, the particular limestone and wild thyme smell of a specific island that is different from every other island smell in the Aegean, that no amount of time can make your nose forget. He knelt on the sand and pressed his hands against the earth of Ithaca and wept, not for grief this time, or not only for grief, for everything. Athena told him what he needed to know because she had been watching all of it, even from the careful distance of the wandering years, and she knew the suitors were in his hall. 108 of them, the young men of Ithaca and the surrounding islands who had arrived over the years, ostensibly to court Penelope, and who had stayed and eaten and drunk and treated the palace of Odysseus as if it were already their own. Penelope had held them off. God knows how, Athena said, with a kind of admiration that had a long history behind it, for years. She had promised to choose from among them when she finished weaving a great burial shroud for old Laertes, and each night she unpicked what she had woven by day, so the shroud was never finished, and the decision was always deferred. They had discovered this after 3 years, and they were angry now, and pressing harder, and the situation was, to use a diplomatic phrase, urgent. His son Telemachus was alive, 20 years old, his father's son in the jaw and the eyes, away on a journey of his own. His father Laertes lived on the farm, in grief. His wife was still weaving. "What do you want to do?" Athena asked. He told her. She changed him. It is one of the stranger and more powerful moments in the story. The goddess reaching out and touching him, and the transformation working through his body. The dark hair whitened, the smooth skin aged and roughened, the broad shoulders rounded. She dressed him in rags. She gave him a staff and a beggar's wallet and sent him to find his old swineherd Eumaeus, who had tended the pigs faithfully through 20 years of absence, and who was, as it turned out, exactly the man Odysseus remembered him being. He arrived at the swineherd's hut looking like nothing, a broken old man with a stick asking for shelter. Eumaeus gave it without hesitation and without knowing who his guest was, because Eumaeus was the kind of man who extended hospitality to beggars on principle, which is exactly the kind of man Odysseus had always kept around him. He was home for days before he revealed himself to anyone but Telemachus. His son came to the swineherd's hut, called back from his journey by Athena, guided without knowing quite why, and Odysseus sent Eumaeus away on a pretext and sat alone with the young man he had last seen as an infant. And the young man who had never known his father looked at the old beggar across the hut and waited. Odysseus said, "I am your father." Telemachus said, "That is not possible. Odysseus is dead, or so far from home he might as well be." Odysseus said, "Look at me." Athena lifted the disguise. For a moment, just a moment, Telemachus saw his father's real face, the face that Penelope had not seen in 20 years, and he burst into tears with the abandoned completeness of a young man who has been holding himself very carefully together for a very long time and has suddenly been given permission to stop. They held each other in the swineherd's hut in the middle of the afternoon and wept together, father and son. And Homer gives them this: like eagles or vultures with hooked claws, whose young the farmers have taken from the nest before their wings were fledged. So pitifully did they weep. Then they made a plan. The day Odysseus walked up to his own palace as a beggar is one of the most quietly devastating in the entire poem, and the reason has nothing to do with the suitors or the strategy or the violence that was coming. It has to do with a dog. His name was Argos. Odysseus had bred him and trained him himself before he left for Troy, a hunting dog of exceptional quality, swift and keen-nosed, and eager in the way of young dogs who have been properly taught and love their work. Odysseus had left before the dog was old enough to go hunting with him. 20 years. The dog had lived 20 years in a palace that had slowly become less the home it was supposed to be and more the property of people who had no particular use for an old dog. And he lay now on a dung heap at the palace gate, elderly and flea-bitten, and barely noticed by anyone who passed. He noticed Odysseus. From 20 paces, through the rags and the altered form and the 20 years of absence, he knew. His ears pricked and his tail moved, weakly because he was very old and very tired, and the body that had once been swift was no longer capable of more than this small gesture. And he looked at the man walking past him and knew him as completely and immediately as only a dog can know a person, which is to say, without doubt, without qualification, without needing to think about it at all. Odysseus saw the dog and looked away and kept walking, because he could not stop, because the plan required that he not stop, because the hall was full of men he needed to surprise, and a king weeping over a dog at the palace gate would ruin the whole thing. He looked away, Homer says, secretly wiping a tear. The dog laid his head back down on the dung heap and died. He had been waiting, is what the story implies, 20 years of waiting, and he had held on just long enough to see what he was waiting for. And then he let it go. Argos, whose name means swift, the bitter irony of it, was the first on Ithaca to recognize the king who had come home. The hall was full when Odysseus entered it in his beggar's rags, and the suitors were everything Athena had described, and a little worse in person. Loud, careless, eating and drinking with the casual destructiveness of young men who have been occupying someone else's space for so long they have forgotten it is someone else's. They threw scraps at the beggar. One of them hit him with a footstool. Penelope, hearing of the stranger in her hall, sent word that she wished to speak to him. She questioned every traveler for news of Odysseus, had been doing so for years, and every year the travelers said, "Sorry, no, nothing definite. I heard something once, perhaps," and she listened and thanked them and went back upstairs to her loom. He sat with her in the firelight that evening, and she did not know who he was. She asked, as she always asked, about her husband, and he told her, in the complex indirection of a man who is telling the truth while pretending to lie, that Odysseus was alive and would be home soon. She wept at this quietly and without self-pity, the way someone weeps who has been weeping about the same thing for a very long time and has found a sustainable pace for it. She told him she had decided to end it. She would set the contest tomorrow. Odysseus's great bow, the one no other man had been able to string, and 12 axe heads set in a row, and whoever could string the bow and send an arrow through all 12 axe heads in a single shot would have her hand. Odysseus told her it was a good plan. He went to sleep among the suitors in the hall and lay awake in the dark, listening to them snore, and thought about how the next day would go, running through it the way he had always run through things. The angles, the contingencies, the moments where something could go wrong, and what to do if it did. He was home. He was 10 feet from the hall where he had grown up, breathing the same air. Tomorrow, with or without the permission of anyone's expectations, he was going to stop being a beggar. The contest was exactly as Penelope had described. The suitors could not string the bow. They tried one after another, the young men of Ithaca, who had spent the better part of 3 years eating Odysseus's food and drinking his wine and pressing his wife for a decision, and not one of them could bend the great bow far enough to loop the string over its upper tip. They warmed the bow at the fire. They rubbed it with fat. They sweated and strained and cursed and went back to their benches and drank more wine. Odysseus asked from his corner if he might try. The suitors laughed. The idea of a ragged old beggar attempting what the finest young men in the islands had just failed was funny in the way that humiliation is funny when it happens to someone else. Telemachus, who knew, authorized it with a straight face. Someone handed the bow to the beggar. Odysseus turned it over in his hands. He ran his fingers along the limbs the way you examine something you made or chose yourself, checking for damage, for warping, for the particular changes that 20 years of storage make in wood and sinew. He found it sound. He found it exactly as he remembered it. He strung it easily, without apparent effort, the way a skilled musician strings a lyre, and plucked the bowstring, and the bow sang a single clear note that rang through the hall and left a silence behind it. Every man in the room felt something change. He knocked an arrow and sent it through all 12 axe heads and looked up. Then Athena lifted the disguise. What followed was brief and total. He shot Antinous first, the worst of them, the ringleader, the one who had thrown the footstool. while the man still had his wine cup raised to his lips, and then he threw off his rags and stood in the hall of his own palace and told the remaining suitors, clearly and without drama, exactly who he was and what was going to happen now. Telemachus stood beside him, Eumaeus the swineherd, the loyal cowherd Philoesius. They had locked the hall. They had removed all the other weapons. There was Odysseus with his bow and the men he trusted, and there were 107 suitors understanding all at once that the long patience of Ithaca had come to its end. It was over quickly. The hall was purified afterward, as ancient ritual required. Sulphur burned, doors opened, maids summoned to clean. And when it was done, the palace smelled of smoke and sulphur and the sharp, clean smell of opened air. And Odysseus stood in his own hall in the morning light for the first time in 20 years. Eurycleia, the nurse, ran upstairs to find Penelope. She was asleep. The gods had given her the gift of sleep through the noise, keeping her unconscious and unaware, while the reckoning happened below. And Eurycleia shook her awake with shaking hands and said, "He is here. He is home. Odysseus is home." Penelope did not believe her. This is perhaps the most truthful moment in the entire poem. Not because disbelief is the logical response to 20 years of someone being missing and then suddenly appearing, but because Penelope had been told so many times by so many travelers that Odysseus was coming, that Odysseus was alive, that Odysseus would be home soon, and every single time the relief had been followed by the long, slow resettling of absence. She had learned through 20 years of practice not to let herself believe things until she was sure. Belief was too expensive. She had too little of it left to spend carelessly. She came downstairs and sat across the hall from the man who said he was her husband and studied him for a long time without speaking. He sat across from her and let her look. Finally, she said to Eurycleia in his hearing, "Bring out the great bed. Bring it out from the bedchamber and make it up for him." It was a test. Only one person in the world knew the secret of the bed, that it could not be moved, that one of its 4 posts was a living olive tree rooted in the earth of Ithaca, that Odysseus himself had built the bedchamber around it, that there was no bringing it out because it was, in the most literal sense, part of the island. He had told no one. She had told no one. He said, "That bed cannot be moved. I built it. One post is the living olive tree, unless someone has cut through the roots." He was not smiling when he said it. There was something else in his voice, something between hurt and hope, the sound of a man who has been tested and is not sure if passing the test is enough. She heard it, and she was across the room before she had decided to move, her arms around him, her face against his neck, and she wept, and he held her, and the hall was very quiet. "Do not be angry with me," she said when the weeping had steadied. "I was afraid." He said, "I know." Homer says, "She wept in his arms and could not stop, and he held her like a man who has finally reached the shore after very long swimming," which is, perhaps, exactly what he was. Later, much later, when the hall was quiet and the house was still, they lay in the great bed, the bed he had built, rooted in the earth of Ithaca, going nowhere. And she told him everything she had endured, and he told her everything he had seen. And Homer says that they talked until the morning star appeared, which tells you how long they talked, and that sweet sleep did not close either of their eyes until the tale was done, which tells you what the tale was worth to both of them. The full story, given and received between the only 2 people in the world who could properly be its audience. The complete accounting of 20 years, the shape of the loss, and the measure of what had survived it, told in the dark of the bedchamber of a house rooted in the earth of a small rocky island in the Ionian Sea. He had left as a young man. He had come back as something harder and more patient and more broken and more whole. All of these at once, in the way that only long and costly experience can make a person into more than one thing simultaneously. The cleverness was still there. The stubbornness was still there. The love was still there, which is the one that matters, the one that had been sitting at the shore of his chest every morning for 7 years on Calypso's island, looking out at the sea. Penelope had held the island together. This cannot be overstated, and the story does not overstate it because it does not need to. It simply shows her doing it year after year with the limited tools available to a woman in a world that did not give women many tools, using her intelligence and her patience and her deliberate management of time in the same way Odysseus used his, because they were, in this fundamental way, perfectly matched. She had known, on some level perhaps, what he had not quite admitted to himself until the shore of Ogygia, that home is not a place exactly. It is a set of relationships. It is the people who keep your name alive, and your bed made, and your memory intact while you are gone. Without her, there was no Ithaca to return to. Without him, there was no point in keeping Ithaca at all. Together, in the great bed, on the island, they were the whole story. And so we come to rest here, at last, on a small rocky island in the Ionian Sea, where the wild thyme grows above the harbour, and the stars are clear above the mountains, and the sea is never quite out of sight or hearing from any part of it. 20 years, 12 ships become one, and then none. 300 men become one. One man stubbornly, improbably, at enormous cost, and by any number of means both noble and otherwise, comes home. The story does not say he was unchanged. It would be dishonest to say he was. The man who came home was harder and more patient and more careful with what he loved, and far less certain of his own invulnerability than the man who left. He had been to the underworld. He had heard his mother's voice. He had held her and found nothing. He had stood at the mast and listened to the song that offered him the complete story. And he had chosen the incomplete story instead, because the incomplete story had Ithaca in it. He had chosen the incomplete story because the incomplete story was his, and the incomplete story, the one that hurts, the one that asks things of you, the one that takes longer than it should and costs more than you expected and leaves you older and marked by it, turned out to be enough, more than enough. It was everything.